So personally, I mean, obviously we got all the guys around here that took losses, you guys. I'd like to hear from each of you and kind of see what happened and how it was different from before and that kind of thing. You want to start off?
Yeah, I can. Of course, I farmed the fleet place, 20 years ago, my brother and I did. The north side of Alisell Lane is the first time that I can ever remember that actually went underwater. The south side of Alisell Lane, we have lost before. You go upriver on the Jenny White place, I've had the loss in 2011 was not a severe, probably another 70, 80 acres this year that are actually underwater. And then when you go further up the river to the Morris place, we actually had more land that we lost. The water stayed there longer, and so it completely killed the crop instead of before. I had some crop that was completely dead and some that was salvageable.
How many acres is that total, or percentage-wise of what you farmed?
Right at 600 acres.
Wow. So this you rented too up here.
Yes.
So how does that affect the landlord?
Well, it's a cash lease, so he will get his.
So he'll get his money. Yeah. So you're just out that money.
Or
as if you were getting a crop.
To be able to get in there and put some kind of forage crop to help get through this year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
When do you think you'll get back on it? Is there a chance for a crop?
Maybe like sedan grass or something in the middle of June, but it's going to have to come off pretty good. So.
Mm-hmm. And be more expensive probably to get the crop in than it would be otherwise if you have to fly it on or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you're taking the risk of not getting a crop and putting more money out there.
Mm-hmm. And you run cows too. How did it affect that?
Well, my forage base is drastically reduced. Out of that acres, there was about 350 of that was in alfalfa that is gone.
So that's not just for this season,
Yeah.
but that's for next year as well. You've got feed you've got to come up with for the winter.
And then, like my brother and sister-in-law, I do all their baling of bluegrass. Well, they've lost 300 or 400 acres, at least, of bluegrass that there'll be a forage. They'll have to go somewhere else to get that. Mm-hmm. And then a couple neighbors that I do some custom hay for, that income is also gone.
So you lose the income of the custom, plus they're going to lose the crop as well.
Sure, yeah.
So it's multiple. I mean, it hits you more than one way. Goes pretty deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do to overcome that? What do you do to make that up?
Hopefully find some more forage someplace. Mm-hmm. I kind of sat down and thought about that. Gross income is, of course I didn't have real high valued crops like some of the other people in the room under that water. I didn't have a whole lot of expenses besides establishing the alfalfa. But alfalfa is not a huge user as far as putting a lot of fertilizer on in the fall. So, that I'm better off, I guess, than as far as I don't have $500 or $600 an acre tied up into this, which some people do at this point when they lost their crop. But as far as potential gross income, it's going to be around $500,000 different this year unless I go find something to replace that.
Right. That's big. That's big in anybody's book. Yeah. And you guys lost quite a bit too. You've got quite a bit underwater.
Over the years, we expect to have some seepage through the levee. And so typically in the last half a dozen years, I've watched the snowpack and prayed a little bit, and it's gone off perfectly. We had minimal flooding. This year we had a pretty good snowpack, as you know, and when the rain on the snow came, we watched the CFS on the Grande Ronde and then later on Catherine Creek, and it was, a foreknowledge that we're going to have some very high water on Catherine Creek. The Grande Ronde came out earlier than Catherine Creek in terms of stage, and then Catherine Creek didn't have any place to go, so it actually almost stopped the river watched through the years. And then it started seeping through. We didn't have any water go over levees, but when it seeps through, all the gopher holes and so forth, and then it did get to the point where it was eroding some levee tops. We did a lot of sandbagging, and we fired up the pumps we haven't gotten out for quite a few years to try and keep up with the seepage. So Dick Mason came out after the event to talk to me for an observer report, and he asked me about how many acres did you have underwater. And as I counted up the actual acres underwater, it wasn't a huge number, but I told him it's not so much how many acres are underwater, is how many fields are affected
Right.
by the water. And that means every swale is full of water and every high top
Is dry.
is dry. And so when and if you get rid of the water, you have a real management problem in dealing with that. So we have pumps, high lift pumps. We're pumping quite a bit of water over the levees back into the river. And at this point in time, we probably have recovered 90% of what was underwater. Those fields are still affected. And you can't run out a fertilizer rig right now
Right.
and apply fertilizer very easily. So I'll be a couple more weeks starting, my sons will be a couple more weeks, starting what would have been done a month ago. The thing that is overlooked frequently is that our flooding occurs in April and May. In April and May, you have pretty near all the expenses, with maybe the exception of some pesticide spraying, that you're going to have in that crop. And if it's a perennial crop and you stand to lose it, you've lost several years of income. And so it's more of a management issue, and the impact is spread over several years. The loss in impact is spread over several
Explain that in a practical sense. I mean, and what do you mean in several years?
Well, we had a perennial bluegrass field underwater and a fescue field underwater. They're both dead. A third of the field looks great, but the entire field has to be taken out. You can't manage little spots. And so that field, you know, as you know, it takes a year to establish a grass. And so you have to amortize that year out over the 5 or so years that you have it in. And if you have only 1 year or 2 years before the crop is lost, that amortization becomes a bigger factor in your overall income from that field. So it's quite significant.
And then how long after you lose that crop can you plant a crop like that back into the field?
Well, if you came back with the same variety, you might be able to establish the crop the next year, but there again, you're out another establishment year, and it would be just as, in fact, for the income from that year, you would probably want to stick in a short crop, a short annual crop, just to get some income from the lost, what would otherwise be a totally lost year.
So what you mean by an establishment year, you get no income off of that crop
Right.
that first year, your perennial grass.
And you have quite a bit of expense into the crop too in that establishment year. So you have the expense there, now you lost the crop, so that's 2 years that you're out, and you have both years worth of expenses into it, and you don't have an income the third year off of it because it's gone.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had water on one of our larger peppermint fields, and what you have to do is go up on the top of Mount Harris and look down on our farm and see the channels that have been developed over the thousands of years that the river has meandered, and you'll understand why it's such a dilemma. we lost what I would consider the whole field to being underwater, but there was shallow spots and deep spots, and as we pumped, I could see that we were saving the high spots. Whether in the long run that becomes an economic prudent decision, I don't know yet, because we'll have to see what's left after. We've pumped off most of that water at this point in time, but there's nothing green yet showing.
And even if there was, would you expect crop off that?
If there is a crop, it's going to be a marginal crop, and if you're talking about keeping a perennial in, you might consider maybe we ought to do something else. So that's the dilemma, and if the valley floor were completely flat, it would be a less difficult management issue, at least in our.
Or sloped 1.5 degrees to the south.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And Dennis, you've had some experience with those perennial crops, like in 2011, they got flooded in here.
Yes, yeah.
And what happened there?
I wasn't as successful as I hoped.
Yeah.
But yeah, we planted what I call a salad mix. There was, some turnips, some deep-rooted plants, some cereal grains, some different stuff, trying to get a hay put together that was a valuable enough protein that it could replace alfalfa. But the yields that we had, a lot of this was under dry land, and it seems like when the water leaves, it leaves in a hurry. And I had a hard time keeping the roots of a lot of them plants to keep up with the moisture content in the ground. And it wasn't as successful as I hoped, I guess. The tonnage, I didn't get the tonnage that I kind of expected, even at a half rate. But
You guys kept pretty much dry, right, on this side? It cost quite a bit of money to do that.
Yeah, but at least, we never got flooded this year, and I mean, that was real good. Of course, it's made us late, to get in crop down here, and that's, with the weather like it is now, I don't know.
Right,
I
as
had
late as it is.
one field of wheat that's pretty spotty. Just like Phil was talking about the high spots and the low spots, in the field, so.
So that's from seepage.
Yes,
Seepage,
yeah, sappy, yeah, seepage.
Do you know how much water you pumped out? Did you measure it?
Oh, no, I do know that volume pump runs 2,200 a minute, and we'd be on like 24 hours, off 8, back on 24, and I figured by the time that we'd done, that we pumped over 100 hours.
So you got 100 hours with electricity, maintenance, yeah.
But at least, like I said before, it didn't flood, because flooding, especially down here, is bad. We get everything from the south end, bottles, cans, sticks, logs, I mean, everything, and it's a heck of a mess,
Right.
to clean up. And then, the worst part about it is, next year, weeds, everything. Canadian thistle, wild oats,
The weeds that were washed down the
Yep.
river, yeah.
yeah, so you fight that then for a while. And in grass and something like that, I mean, that's bad. I mean, you gotta wait a couple of years, to get back in the grass game again.
You guys had mint go under right here on the other side of the river. How'd that go?
Well, the field man, he doesn't think there's much of it alive, but some of it's actually up, so I guess we'll find out.
So it could survive. You got the water off pretty quick on it. How long did it take to get the water off?
Well, all of it didn't go under, so we're still pumping off of it.
Yeah,
Over a month.
Yeah, seepage.
right. And it'll continue because the water's still high.
And there was 2 pumps down there pumping.
Well, we had 3 down there to start with, so we got it pulled off there pretty good to start with, but there's just 1 lift pump down there now.
And Sean farms our other ground off of between Stryker and Hull, and it was, the water down there was 6 feet, You couldn't see the top of the wheel lines.
Well, you couldn't see the wheel line motors, you could see the top of the wheel line wheels, so it was probably 5.5 to 6 feet in areas. Most of the crop down there, well, in fact, it's all perennial crop. There's bluegrass and peppermint. That field was a newly planted field last fall. Bluegrass ranged from first year crop to fifth year crops.
What's your estimate in the cost of planting mint and getting to that first establishment year of grass? What's the expense per acre in that?
Well, just the rootstock alone is $300 an acre plus transportation costs to get it here.
And planting costs and the
Planting
labor and
costs, and then
you had fertilizer in that?
there was no fertilizer put on that field, but it was sprayed with chemical, and so there's no other option as far as a crop this year.
Because the chemical residual, you can't plant
Chemical
anything else.
residual, nothing else is gonna grow there this year except for peppermint,
So you could have $500 or $600 an acre pretty easy.
easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$60,000 on 100 acres, pretty easy. Plus the cost, the opportunity cost of the land.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the waters just went off within this last week. The ground down there, the levees, the water ran over the levees and it completely filled up above the Stryker Bridge to the point where it was running over the levee, below the Stryker Bridge, back into the river.
I noticed you had a pivot or a linear down there too. So that's going to be expensive to fix motors that went underwater and.
Yeah, all the gearboxes will have to be drained, center drives will be replaced. That's a linear, so there's a diesel motor and a generator
And they're all
and
gone.
VFD drive and panel, and we're expecting that they're gone, so they'll all have to be replaced.
Yeah.
And the wheel lines, the motors went under, so.
So just in that one linear, you might have 30 or 40 grand into it.
Easily.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to bring up, that the guys were mentioning the crops, and farmers have, depending on the crops they raise, they're on like a 12-year crop rotation. They know what's going to be planted on a certain field in approximately 12 years. They'll raise mint for 3 to 4 grass crops, 4 to 5, sometimes 6. But they have to keep track of the chemicals that they're putting on these properties. Like Sean said with the mint, he had no option to go back in this spring with a crop because of the chemical. I just wanted to point that out, that this isn't decided year to year. You know well ahead of time what you're going to raise on what field.
No,
So you're
we'll-
saying, oh, go
We'll
ahead.
spend a great deal of time out in the fields thinking about all of this, what we're gonna be raising on this ground for 10 years from now, if we're fortunate enough to be here.
And then so if you lose 3 of those years, now you're at an 18 to 20 year.
Well, it's hard to get back into the rotation, especially with bluegrass. I'm not gonna be able to put the whole thing back in, and as Phil said, unless we can plant the same variety, we can't go back in with bluegrass for, well, it has to be out for 3 years. Fescue 18 months before you can go back in with a different variety.
And then you add to that what Armand was saying about the weeds, then it just further complicates.
It'd be real
Further complicates
difficult
that.
to replace any of those acres this year with grass crop.
Yeah.
You wanna wait until next year, so then you're 3 more years out from realizing any income off those fields.
So Colton, I think you're the only one that bought land this year.
Well, I moved into that place in 2015. That's when it was first acquired. And, you know, prior to that, in 2011, when everything kind of flooded here in the valley again, Dan had always told me that those 2 wheel lines with 7-foot wheels on them, right behind my house. He could jet boat over the top of them. And every time I'd look out there, and I heard that story, I thought, there's no way. I'm looking at the grade. I'm like, there's just no way. Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got photos from the back porch. The water got within about me to you of my back porch, and during that time, it had just gotten dark, and it really started coming up. And I looked at my wife and said, you know what? I don't know what is going to transpire in the morning. I just don't. But it's too late to throw any hay bales out. I ain't got no sandbags, so say a prayer, cross your fingers, and see what happens. And the next morning, lo and behold, those wheel lines completely disappeared. Completely. And just the day before that, we'd gone down there at about 10 o'clock in the morning because we'd noticed the water coming up. And so we decided we'd go walking down there, and we saw what we called waterfalls coming over our dikes. And that just can't be. But if it's going to happen, I want to at least bear witness to it and see the phenomenon. And we walked down there, and lo and behold, yeah, we've got water cascading over the top. And I found a new appreciation for cheatgrass because it was sodded in good enough that we were sitting there watching it, and the water had been coming over through the night, and the dikes and everything were holding. And we walked down, and at that point, pretty much everything was under some form of water, whether it was a foot or 5 feet in spot, 6 feet in spot. And the next morning is when it just, we just woke up and everything was gone. Of course, I didn't have any pivots or anything, but all the engines on the wheel lines are gone. It magically got up into my actual my pump motor, so it's shot now. I don't know about my VFD. But it was a weird phenomenon to look down there and not see a dike anywhere in sight. Not north, south, east. Of course, the west there wasn't any, but just nothing but water. And the one field and the one crop. I had 2 crops planted. I had a field of wheat, which was down in what I call my dike field. It has a dike built clear around it. And talking to a couple other, some of you may know more than me, but I was told originally that Buster Wells built those dikes around that one field down in there. And Kirk Inn was telling me that Buster had always told him that since he built those dikes, he's never ever seen water get into that field, besides seepage from muskrat hole, gopher hole, whatever. But again, it came clear over the top of all those dikes, submerged all the wheel lines and everything else. It took the alfalfa, it took my wheat, it took behind the house. I was really looking forward to finally having what I consider a higher value crop, a grass crop, but it's now gone. I did get a seed bill in the mail.
You did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. But so it's gone now, and but it didn't. Fortunately, it didn't get into my house. It got right up, almost into one of my barns, but
So you've got percentage-wise, how much of your place was
100%.
100%?
Everything, except for the tractor, the 2 or 3 acres where my house and my barn sit on. I didn't think there was, when it finally stopped close to my house, I was leaving to take the kids to school, and out to the south where Brett's comes up, that water had actually gotten clear up to Ruckman at that point, and I was like, oh crap, it's gonna get me from the south side.
You're going to get
I'm gonna
surrounded.
get nailed because it was in that little pasture I have back there. And fortunately at that point, it stopped. At that point, it didn't come up any higher. But it sat there at that level. Oh, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at all my pictures and everything, but 2.5 weeks, it just wouldn't leave. And yeah, I mean, it inundated, I don't know how many hundreds of acres, because before that, all of Brett's ground was bare for the most part. The ground that Wade farms was bare. And I remember when we were walking down to look at the water coming over the dikes, I looked across to the east and on a lot of the Wilson ground. I'm like, why do I have waterfalls and they don't? You know, it was just, but, and then somehow or another, evidently, from what I understand, some dikes or levees broke, and all of a sudden it busted out and all, and
Yeah, on the Wilson ground, one of the dikes actually broke is what put that under, and then on the Wilson ground, that's what we call the gray place. It actually come around a dike and then chewed a hole in it, and that's what filled it up.
yeah, because that was one of my biggest concerns. I mean, it's one thing to lose everything you have invested out there in that ground via crops and infrastructure and everything else, but to have dikes break was something that I just didn't want to have. And my knowledge, none of them broke, but I'm still sitting there underwater for the most part. The areas that typically do flood, that I call my meadowgrass acres, which is about 110 acres, they're still flooded, and I don't understand why. The river has dropped enough, and that's a pretty simple equation. River comes up, it runs out into the field. When the river drops, it runs back out. But on my way over here, they're still covered. So I don't even know that I'll have that crop. Normally I rely on a little bit of water coming in every year to water that ground for the hay crop. This year, I don't know whether there's even going to be a hay crop.
And then like Armin says, it'll have sticks and limbs and,
Yeah, and by the time you get out there to try and even pick it up,
right.
whatever grass is exposed, it just turns into a nightmare.
So you're in the same position that Dennis is with it. You're still going to have to make a land payment,
I still got payments.
With no
to make.
income.
Yeah, if I don't make my payment, they take it.
right?
You know, and it's a tough deal. Yeah.
No question.
And I thought about, you know, like somebody else had mentioned, you know, trying to run out and put, you know, some sedan grass in or a teff, something like that. But the problem there is by the time you go out and you stand the expense of putting it in, all of a sudden by then the river normally drops anyway. So if you don't have any water at that point, when you need water to try and irrigate it, to try and increase your tonnage or get something off of it, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I could, if the water happens to dissipate and I can get out there and get on that ground by the middle of June, which at this point I don't think there's something, but I don't think you could. You get it planted and all of a sudden now you need water. Now the river's gone. It's gone. So it's just, I don't know.
So if that segues a little bit into some kind of solutions, you know, if you could take some of that flow, not have it as much now, and use it during the summer,
Well,
that would be the
absolutely.
benefit,
Yeah, you could have a controlled flow all summer long.
right?
Yeah, it'd be the best of both worlds.
Not flush it through the system and then not have it later. Yeah,
And the fish would have water
right.
also.
Yeah, you look at those rivers and even the Grande Ronde, I mean, when it gets down to a trickle, you know how hot that water's gotta be? And I've always just thought, you know, it just makes so much sense to have a continuous flow year-round that you can regulate, monitor. It just makes common sense.
Some of this comes up, and Patty and I have looked into some of the history of the projects that have been proposed or looked at on the Grande Ronde. And of course, back in the 60s, early 60s, where they were talking about putting dams up Catherine Creek and the Grande Ronde, big impoundments. You know, it'd be good for recreation, it'd be good for water flow, it'd be good for flood control. And of course, that was stopped, and probably we'll never be able to talk about dams again. You know, there's 3 dams in Oregon that they're planning on taking out this year. And I think 2 of them are actually are electricity producing. They're not the big ones on the Columbia. There's some of those minor dams that were old and probably are about depleted anyway. But we're not going to see that kind of thing, we feel. But then there's also been studies done about putting small off-stream impounds, many small off-stream impounds done. And the Forest Service actually has that study. And that's kind of what we were discussing, exactly what you're saying, that if we can hold that into the upland, not have the flood events that we have here, and then just let them naturally go back into the system during the summer months. Not only for irrigation water, but also for, you know, for fish and all the benefits from it.
And for some people, they don't realize Russell's dad and your father probably even raised here in the valley. The Grande Ronde River, you could walk across it almost any spot you wanted to, that you picked in the summer. It's not, and there was no irrigation. There weren't the wells. There might have been a few, like the one west of Inwood, that's a huge one, but there wasn't irrigation. So it wasn't irrigation depleting the river water. Where does it go? Maybe it goes underground, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think
But-
it's, yeah.
But it wasn't there anyway, so it's not the farmers or agriculture that has caused this, it's just, that's the way it's always been.
In fact, they might be the benefit because we're taking that water early in the season when we've got it, moving the riparian area out further away from the, artificially away from the river. And then those do return. And they return at 55 degrees after they've gone through the soil profile. So there's a lot of returns that, that happen.
That helps the fish.
But if we could all 3 months ago have taken as much water back out into the, been irrigating, right, Russell? We should have been watering. Yeah, yeah.
That's true.
We just pumped 300 acre feet out of our bottomland into the river, and this week I'm going to take my pump and put it on the other side and start pumping it in. Yeah.
I think Darren's about ready to water some of this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I've been pumping out on the river bottom and then pumping it up on the hill.
Same time. Right. Right. And there's benefit to that. I mean, even now, especially if we could irrigate now, it'd be beneficial.
I wanted to point out that there are many, many more people that have been affected by the flooding that are not here. We have a small area to do this, and it wasn't just pick and choose. There were other people greatly affected, and we appreciate what they're going through emotionally, financially. We're all in the same boat, and it's not a very comfortable feeling to be in. And when they talk about income loss, for the many people that are not ag-oriented, don't take a salary for a year. Don't take a salary for 2 years. Don't take a salary for 3 years. But you still meet your obligations, like the cash rent. You meet your obligations. You take your responsibility and you go forward with it. And you're not in a real good spot to do it, but you follow through.
Another thing that Patty and I talked about that, if you guys could kind of address also, because, we're just two of us talking about it or thinking about it, but it doesn't just affect those people that were directly affected by the flood. The fertilizer companies and the spray companies and the pickup dealers and Walmart. I mean, how does that affect? What are you not going to spend money on this year that you would have spent money on otherwise?
Well, definitely anything that's crop related, but then any disposable income that you may have had, to buy whatever else you wanted that your family needed or just desired to have is all out the window now. You go into a scarcity mode where you just start rat holing every dollar you got, and then you try to figure out how you're going to make $1. And then what's the risk of putting that dollar out there to try and make $1 back when you may not get it back? And so maybe you're just better off just not putting it out there. Yeah, it's a terrible effect. It's a terrible effect, and it trickles down greatly to a lot of people and a lot of businesses in the community.
So Rob and I were talking this morning, for every dollar lost to the community or whoever you're doing business with, they might not be within this community, but it's what percentage?
Well, I've heard there's a 60-time multiplier in any resource industry. So your $500,000 times 60 is what would have been worth in the U.S. economy. And so that seems significant to me, maybe, on a real wide scale, but I don't know what that is locally. I think it was like 7 or so to 1
Isn't
in the
that what
local
you
Yeah,
economy.
I had read something in one of the ag magazines that's a definite,
So that's
locally.
a roughly $3
Yeah.
million, $3.5 million on year $500,000 that's not going to enter the local economy. And that to me is really significant. Yeah, everybody that touches that product or makes something out of it or value adds to it. Blue Mountain Seeds, for instance, that you were going to grow seed for and you were growing seed for, or Barenbrug or whoever, they're not going to have that income now. So the people that they employ are going to be, they're either going to not make as much money to put into the economy, or they're not going to employ people that would have been employed here. So even what seems like the greater area, to you it's a big thing, to the greater area it may not seem like a big thing, but it's significant. It really is.
Well, I believe Blue Mountain Seeds lost 1,000 acres of,
1,000 acres of grass,
1,000 acres. of
which
grass.
roughly $1,400 an acre, so $1.345 million that didn't get sold out of this county, which means that directly, without the multiplier, that directly doesn't go into the economy.
And like Bill mentioned to me, he says that the end user could go through 5, 6 times. I mean, they were planning on that many pounds of Kentucky bluegrass or a fescue, and it's not there now, but they've been relying on that.
That kind of shows you
source
how it
of
can multiply.
supply.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because and that is most likely an international market, which is a lot of the stuff that we grow here, especially, is in international markets, which means that we bring dollars, U.S. dollars, back to this country that wouldn't otherwise come back to the country. So it's like free money because we got that back from a different country.
Well, another issue is losing those markets
Exactly.
for a year. Because they're gonna buy the grass seed, but obviously they're not gonna buy it here.
They might go somewhere else, and if they get used to going someplace else, we may not see them again. Right.
And you got, the markets are important for bluegrass and fescue.
Well, all the grass seed contracts also, I mean, they're depending on those crops every year. And we're fortunate enough that they're not gonna hold us to that crop.
Yeah.
Or we could possibly be paying for a crop that we did not have. Peppermint also.
Right. Right. Anything else, Patty?
Well,
Go ahead.
the infrastructure of the river, Phil, you mentioned about the water coming down the Grand Round early, and the Grand Round River actually was running back up Catherine Creek. I don't know for what distance, but quite a considerable distance. It was actually running uphill, up Catherine Creek. It couldn't get down the channel. And there is, and Russell and Twink, all of you could say a lot more than I. I've heard it for a long time about the channel and some of the problems that need to be addressed on the channel. But if somebody were going to say their levee breached, so they're going to raise that levee another foot, okay? But the guy upriver, downriver, I mean, it's a continual thing. That's not a solution. It's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid. We need some type of containments off-stream, off-river channel, Catherine Creek, some type of a containment, more than one. And I would like to think common sense of people that the agencies, as I've been told, ABC entities, could come together on something. We all have our own ideas, but to be open-minded, to come to the right solution for all, it can be done. It just depends on how bad you want to do it for everybody.
Well, you got a lot of obstacles though. I mean, that's what's bad. Government rules. And those kind of people, they're hard, to beat. You got environmentalists, you got these guys up here locally that are taking orders from the guys on the other side of the state.
Are you talking about our governor now?
No, I wouldn't say anything like that. I would never say anything like that. But that's a big problem too. In the old days, these farmers, they just went out and did it, nobody said anything, and it works, see? But now we gotta have a study. We gotta have a $50,000 study on eighth of a mile of levee.
Or $300,000 in studies that could have been used for actually doing something of value?
God, no.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right.
Is dollars not well spent? From
Oh,
their
yeah,
side.
sure.
You know, and the interesting
Sure.
thing, just like I was talking about that Forest Service study, the study's been done, and it's a practical method. So how do you take that, from that point? How can you move that forward and make it possible? And what we're doing is running our businesses and trying to make our payments and trying to work with your landlords and plant your crops and pump the water off your land. That's what we do. It'd be interesting to have, if we couldn't get the entire community involved with that, the people that do business with us, knowing that they wouldn't lose that income if they had some of these projects or something that they could push forward. And maybe that's where our problem is. It's not just our problem.
It's the whole.
Economically, it's the entire area.
And insurance. I've asked people, or had people ask me, well, you have insurance, don't you?
Right.
Well, this isn't your house, no. There's no insurance available. I suppose you could buy it privately if you were a multimillionaire. I don't know how much the premiums would be, but if it's not a government program crop, you can't get federal crop insurance on it. So, and then you pay for flood insurance on wheat, and premium is expensive, and you don't have any floods for 3, 4, 8 years, and you decide, oh, we're fine. And sure enough, one year you don't have it on your grain crop, and you flood, so.
It's like hail insurance. You pack that stuff for 20 years and you might use it, one time? Well, maybe 2 times.
Well, Russell and I farmed for 52
But it'll be the
years.
year that you don't have it till you get nailed, say.
Once you get
Well, I
nailed,
should
you're
have
in
told.
that zone
I should have
where
bought
the
it,
premiums
see?
go up.
Yeah.
Because they track
It
it.
never fails.
Yeah, they go from $100 to $2 a month.
Yeah. Well, in 52 years farming, almost, what have we collected? Maybe twice on hail insurance? 3 times, not very many. And then it's a percentage
It's
of your
5% of your crop.
Right, so you don't rake in the dollars for a lost crop.
Well, and in 2016? Last year we got that big hailstorm, at least over here anyway. I learned another new nuance from the crop adjusters. It just shredded the wheat, but if there's no exposed heads, according to the crop insurance policy, there is no damage. You can have wheat that just gets mowed like a mower, but there was no heads exposed, so
Really?
there's no damage because it's a grass. Theoretically, it can grow back. And I argued with him on it because, most fall wheats, winter wheats, tiller in the fall, a little bit in the spring. Well, the tillers equal the head. Well, if you cut the tillers off with hail balls, then you've lost your potential income from that crop. But no, it's considered a grass.
And they didn't pay on it.
Nope, not one thing. Because it has the ability to grow back.
Yeah.
One thing you can't insure against is the emotional loss.
Right.
And Patty mentioned emotion, and we're all tough guys and don't want to talk about that because we can take anything that comes down the road, but we can't. And it does take a toll. And I watch my kids taking their first hit, and it's tough on me, let alone them. So there's a whole bunch of other costs besides the dollar value that we can talk about freely that has a significant impact in our lives.
Very much so.
And we all try to get ahead, and you all try to get to some point where you can be comfortable at retirement, and you just lost 2 years of that. Sorry. No, but I mean, really, you know, when you think about that, it sets you back that far. And you know, same in your case.
Well, and even with forage crops this year, you know, last winter was one of those winters where all of a sudden there was the stocks were depleted. So if you had a pile of acres or alfalfa and things of that nature, just because of the depletion, all of a sudden this year you maybe could have got a little bit more ahead, just because the price would be on a ton of alfalfa would be a little bit more. But now
You're not going to make that windfall either.
you're not, he's not going to make that or even have
He's
the
gonna have to go
ability
pay for
to.
it.
And now he's going to be forced to buy forage at a higher price. It's just a continuate hit. They don't stop coming, and then the whole time you're thinking about it, saying, "Am I going to be able to survive it, or is this one event going to be the one thing
Right.
that cost me everything I've worked my entire life for?" And there is a lot of emotion.
You bet.
And it's
And you
hard.
share that with your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it trickles down there too.
Well,
And
there's money that you're losing all the way around. You get to thinking about it. We all equip ourselves with equipment to farm the acres we farm, and if you just lost half your crop or 25% of it, whatever that is, you all of a sudden don't need all that equipment, but you're not going to sell it, more than likely, unless you have to. You're still going to have those costs, and it's not going to be as productive this year.
And you're still, some of those you're making payments on as
Sure.
well.
So everywhere you look, you're losing out.
And then you drive to the other side of the valley or the middle of the valley and you see the alfalfa that's, you know, you think 3 weeks right after stock show, second week in June, they're going to be harvesting. I mean, the crops look phenomenal. For what I know about it, the grass, you know, they're starting to water now. It's dry. But then you come back on this side, which so many people that travel the valley had no idea of the many acres that were flooded because, number one, some don't get too far from La Grande, but even there was some from La Grande to Cove that they saw, but these huge lakes, which they're still there. They don't see because they're on top of the ridge, and this is down lower. They don't see them. They would see to the north of Ambler, east and north of Ambler, if they were traveling to Elgin. But if they weren't traveling to Elgin, they didn't see the water. They didn't know what was the big deal. And then we did get an article in the paper for those people that either look online or have a subscription. But there were so many people that weren't even aware of it.
Well, the ones that had to get to work, they seen it.
Yeah.
This road was the only road that was open for several weeks.
You know, and that's another issue I think that should be addressed is just access. You know, if you had to get an ambulance from the hospital out to some of you guys on the other side of the river, you're right. This was the only road that was open,
Yeah, I told Patty that, fire.
right? Fire?
Timber wasn't gonna get over here very damn quick.
No. They'd have to go to North Powder.
Well, it was this road, and then it was Indian Creek. How many miles is that
Right.
from the south to the north?
And then Market to the south, but it was open, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't go under this. In 2011, part of
Yeah.
it went under, didn't it?
Just for a day there was some water on it. I did not see it, but that's what I was
Yeah.
told. But like Peach and Road going back the other way, it was underwater. But that was all a short term, and that's what people thought the flood was.
Right.
You know, I think it was back
Came out of
when
the Cove
Robins
Highway.
were having their appreciation day course, we was taking pumps out of the river, so we didn't go, but they, you know, they talked about their parking lot had a little water in it and how bad the ground around was flooding. Well, 2 days later, you drive over there and you can
Gone.
see a
It
little
was gone.
debris, but there wasn't no water. You know, you can see where it had been. But I think my brother told me he started the lift pumps down here, I want to say it was the 14th, 15th of March. And on Lauren's place over there, I started on the 17th. And, you know, the lift pumps were designed to take the seepage. But when, you know, so we've been really pumping on this and keeping up for 20 days or so, because I think it was about the 9th of April or something is when the big hit was.
Yeah, it was
That's when it
Somewhere
really
there,
started
when it
backing
started
up.
going
It was the 10th, I think. It was the day after my birthday.
Gotcha. But one of the days when I come down here to see if I could get through, I headed down and by the hump pond there, and I could see the water was bad, and had some time to kill. And I ended up having to go clear to Indian Creek. And then I got on the other side. Well, I couldn't really get back then, so I was headed to talk to a landlord over in Union. And I was surprised that Catherine Creek wasn't running, and I got a piece of pasture ground over on Little Creek below Union, and Little Creek was not running that hard, and neither was Catherine Creek. And I kept thinking to myself, you know, at some point this is going to blow up because the ground round is ripping, and Catherine Creek really wasn't roaring in Union. And then it took about 2 days, and then that come together, and like Phil said, it was just continually backing up, and some of the ground on the south end that you've seen underwater for years and years, it was starting to go under by that time. But it was 3 or 4 days after the high water was actually here.
Yeah, we started going over the levees down here probably on the 9th, because we moved the linear to the highest ground that was there,
Good,
which wasn't much higher than any of the rest of it, but, and then you're always hopeful it's not gonna get as high as it did, but it got higher than I've ever seen it.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing it that far from the ditch that drains the ponds at the Hunt place. It's
Well, it
never
was-
been that far on the east field of that. It really wasn't that far from the foothill road. And you think of the elevation of that compared to the elevation down on the lower fields. It was huge.
Yeah.
It was said to me a long time ago that no two floods are the same. And, you know, naively, when I first heard that, I thought, well, if water goes up, it's got to equalize, so how could they not be the same? But it is true.
It is.
Yeah.
There's no two floods that are the same.
Right.
And this one, you were just describing this area flooding early, and I have to confess, I thought at the time, "Whew, we're going to skate
make
by
it."
this one.
Right.
That's a farmer. One's dilemma is another one's delight.
But soon enough, it came back and caught us, probably 3-4 days later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what was weird with Catherine Creek. I can't figure Catherine Creek out because, like you were saying, and even on the Wilson ground, it was sitting there just fine. We were completely inundated, and the ground to the north of me was inundated. And then when I was talking to Sage Elmer, and all of a sudden down by Booth Lane, that Peppermint, Seth and Jed was flooding, and I heard water was going across Booth Lane. And I'm like, how? I mean, this is 3, 4, 5 days after, you know, the 9th. Well, and then I'd heard the levees had broke. And I'm like, okay, that's a big court to pull. So all of a sudden I thought, okay, the river's gonna drop. Instantly it should drop. It just inundated however many, at least a couple, 2,000-3,000 acres with several feet of water. So
Went somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
river did not go down.
Yeah.
Did not drop an ounce. And it's like, okay, well, those corks have been pulled. That's now underwater. Where was that water before? Was it just sitting somewhere bottled up? I just, and it's like some of the water, Brett Rudd had called because Brett's been, you know, he had a bunch of his ground get flooded, and Peppermint, he lost a half circle of Peppermint pretty much, and a half circle of Bluegrass there north of me. And all of a sudden, miraculously, you start seeing water just disappear. that ground just to the north of me, the Wade Farms, was it last Saturday? I think it was. I think it was last Saturday night. It was still covered with water. Sunday morning,
Gone.
gone. And to my knowledge, they don't have a pump out there
Not one that
pumping,
big.
and yet my river it's still up there. And I'm still inundated, and all of a sudden it just dissipates. Brett called me and said, "Where did it go?" I said, maybe there's a huge sinkhole somewhere. Maybe that's the next thing it's going to hit.
You're gonna find that one
You know,
tomorrow.
because it just doesn't make any sense. Like I said earlier, my meadowgrass is still underwater. My dike field has pretty much drained out. There's still pockets of ponds and everything else in it. But it just has a pipe running underneath the dike that lets, I guess in the advent that it did get flooded, which it did, it would run out and into the meadowgrass, which drains back into the river. Well, if you've got standing water on one side, how's it get through the pipe and out into the other side? I'm perplexed by the entire thing, but still underwater.
Yeah. Well, and it's different, and it's not, I don't know how significant that is. We all end up getting flooded anyway. But I've had more people say, well, oh, this is just a 100-year flood, right? I said, yeah, it is. It's a 100-year flood, and it happened in 2011. So maybe it's an 8-year flood, or we've got 200 years we don't have to worry about it.
Well, and why was 2016 so much different? 2016, we had the worst winter I can remember since I was a young kid. I'm still plenty young, but it got right up to the top because I was nervous about it. But we were still 6-8 inches from ever cresting over anything from the actual active channel into the fields behind the house. And it was a reasonable warm up. We had rain and everything else. I don't understand why this year, why it happened.
Well, there's been 2011, there's been several years since, 14, 16.
Yeah, there's, right.
It was
Could've been
close,
Yeah.
but it didn't go over. We got lucky.
We held our breath
But
right.
Yeah, there's been times when we've been real close. Just didn't
Bears
quite
have.
happen.
Right.
So it's the 100-year flood that happens 3 or 4 times every 10 years.
Right.
So do you have some information on the years it's flooded, Phil?
I went to the Catherine Creek assessment, which was done recently, and the model watershed was instrumental in doing that. And they have quite a few data points. I'm not going to bore you with it all, but the interesting thing is the difference in CFS between Catherine Creek and the Grande Ronde River. That's pivotal in the difference between the floods from year to year. And this year, we had a lot of, to answer your question, we had a lot of snow recently before some rain, so it was ready to run into the river. That was different than the deep snow we had a few years ago.
Yeah.
And as soon as it started raining, the Grande Ronde was ripping. And so you can look at, if you get this assessment and look at the graphs, you can study the difference in the peak from Catherine Creek and the Grande Ronde River, and then it becomes obvious why the flood happened as it did. But it's not intuitive when you're sitting there, looking out your window and doggone it anyway. I've waited 3 days and
So you mean they were peaking when they coincided then? That
Yeah,
was,
like
yeah,
the top
obviously.
graph.
Right.
yeah. So that's the difference between those 2 particular years. And then the other thing that's this is really interesting reading for anybody, but go back to 1860. My house was built in 1880, so I reference everything around my house. So 1860 wasn't that far earlier than my house being built. But what I was getting to is all the water that comes down the ditch went past my house in those days before 1870 when the dam and the ditch was
made.
So how many acres, does anybody know how many acres of the old channel are no longer part of the river system?
That's a great question. And all you can do is read the narrative of what it was like before 1870. And our side of the valley, for all practical purpose, wasn't farmable. It was marsh ground. And, you know, you could get a short crop in or cut a native crop that dried out enough time so you could get there. I mean, from an economic standpoint, that ditch was such an amazing event, and particularly with the technology they had to build it.
Used horses?
Yeah, one horse with a Fresno.
Yeah, with the
Yeah.
Fresno.
Yeah. So, and then you can tell the sinuosity, the wiggliness of Catherine Creek it's wiggly, and if you look up from Mount Harris, it was wiggly for thousands of years in different places, which causes a lot of our problems because there's depressions and raises, and then there's wind-blown bumps that makes it difficult to have a continuum when it comes to running the water off. But it's an interesting read. for anybody.
So 2011, prior to that, who remembers when you go back? I mean, I asked for some information from Grand Ronde Model Watershed, and it doesn't seem like they have a lot of information on flooding.
There are actually peak,
Okay.
yeah, that information is out there. But I remember stuff like the 2011, in my brain, that's the Pelican flood.
They came and
You know.
ate all the little fish that are out in the field.
And the
And then
frogs.
I can remember May 9th, 1990, when I planted my first mint crop, and I thought, as it started to rain, God loves me, mint loves water, and I am in like flint. And then it rained and rained and rained, and I had a foot of rain and water on my field for over a month. So God didn't like that.
I just like, not that year anyway.
But anyway, those are the mental history isn't very good in terms of date chronology or anything, but I can remember the events clearly, and then what we did to remedy those particular causes is pretty profound.
And you do those on a personal level. I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
we've been talking about our dikes, raising our dikes. You do that on a personal level because that's what you can affect and,
That's right.
and make happen on your own. You don't have to have a committee or a government agency or something like that.
Yeah.
But it does certainly, what I do is going to affect somebody upstream or downstream because I could be
Yep.
protecting people downstream as well by doing that. Like, if you have a pinch point or something like that. So it's a tough question. Solutions are.
Well, when you watch a levee break and the feeling, you can't stop fire and water when you want to stop them. And to watch that happen when a levee breaches and happened to be on part of a levee that we hadn't rebuilt because the levees have been rebuilt. And many of them without government money.
None of ours.
Right.
Yeah,
You just
None
do
of
it.
yours. You guys just did your own projects.
Just do your project. And so it's not as bad as having somebody in your family ill.
That's right.
Granted, there's
true.
much worse things that can happen to our families. But this is a hard one to overcome also.
Yeah, Russell 9, Patty, we've seen that water hit behind Rob's and start over this road right here.
Yep.
I'd stand up there on that hill and I'd think, wow, man.
I was standing
Jeez
I was standing
Louise.
10 feet
Terrible.
from that. I was standing 10 feet from that when it broke and watched it, just the whole thing fold in and come onto Martin's Island. Unbelievable feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the roar of the water
Right.
going over the county road into the twins. It's,
It took about 10 minutes to fill that entire bottomland. Just, yeah.
And another bad thing here on ours, where we have that slough there, it's filled that sucker in. It used to be, the old Grand Round Channel, hell, it was probably 6 feet deep at one time. Well, probably more than that. And now there's, in places it might be 3 feet.
Yeah,
So there's been that much soil that is,
that has moved into it.
yeah,
It wasn't there, so it came from someplace.
yeah, well, yeah, right off the fields,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, everything finds level, doesn't it?
Well, water flow in the river and containing it, so it benefits agriculture and the fish, because these little fish going out in these fields that the pelicans come in and eat, those are not fish that are going to make it back to the ocean. And so it's a win-win.
Well, then see if you can get a dam on the upper Grand Round.
Yeah, I
Then
don't
things will
know.
be fine. We
And-
gotta have the Indians involved too.
Yeah.
Now, maybe if they wanted it, maybe, you know, things would go a little more smoothly.
And it would benefit what they're working for, and it would benefit the businesses in La Grande to have some type of recreation. Do I want a lot of outside people coming in? And, well, you know, things change. So,
Well, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent in the United States on conservation that benefit individuals.
That's true.
This would benefit a community.
Right.
Right.
a
Exactly.
whole community.
Hasn't Oregon been looking, it seems like the last few years, there's been a real precedent with Oregon State to try and find ways for water storage and things of that nature. I mean, I've heard a lot and read a lot about that.
They did it for a while. At one point, in fact, on one of our sloughs, we were able to get a 3-time fill on our storage right.
Yep.
And within a year of that, I tried doing it on the other one, and oh no, they don't do that anymore.
Oh,
It made sense to somebody at one point, but not after that. And that would be, again, holding high waters into the uplands. You could use your stored water before your primaries, and it went away.
It would help the groundwater level
Absolutely,
anytime you store it.
absolutely.
It would help wells.
taking the kids to school one day, and it was after, of course, a few days after we'd been flooded, and I was driving down Booth, and you take that hard left right there where all that wind stuff is and everything in your grain bins and all that. And I looked in that slough, and I looked at my youngest boy Brady, and I said, that slough's empty. Why isn't it full? It could take some water. I'm thinking, okay, divert anywhere. And then, I don't know, it was about a week and a half later, I drove by and I was like, oh, yeah, it's full now.
I gotta tell you,
How did
we
it-
have 3 river bends, and I manage them to be low
Right,
before a flood.
Right.
Before a flood.
Because that's where your seepage will run to.
Okay.
And this year, that's exactly why it was full. All the seepage went there.
There's a seepage.
that was all just going under
There's
the.
26 acres in each of those river bends.
Yeah.
Average 6-7 feet deep. And I had it down to about 3 feet from the bottom, and it's full now.
Wow.
Just from seepage.
Wow.
And then at the same time, I'm pumping the other way over. So, yeah, that's why that happened.
I'll be darned. It was like on the 6th or 7th, Brady and I walked down. We could still walk down. And I was getting some water coming out from right behind the house down below. And I'm like, where's the water coming from? There's, the river's down. And I had a real hatred for muskrats because I'd find these little holes. And Martin had always told me about
They
muskrats.
dig all the way through.
Yeah, I wish I was just dealing with muskrats.
So what about and I've heard a lot of people breaching their dikes to let water back out. How much of that's going to be repaired? And what's the cost in repairing that? Where it ran over your dike, it always erodes away a certain amount of it.
You can look out to the north or behind my house, and depending on where the wave action was,
Right.
on any of those days when we had the high winds and stuff like that, there's serious cut into those dikes. There's spots where there's 2 foot cut into them. And I'm kind of wondering, well, okay, you've already lost everything as it is. You're scraping everything together to try and continue.
You don't have any money to fix that.
I don't have any money to fix it, but on this particular river section, I mean, say you had one blow out, what's your choice? But again, so I don't know what, I'm kind of looking for somebody to tell me what, whether you have to fix it or not. I mean, obviously the integrity of the dike is still there, but there's been erosion that's taken place. So is there going to be a detrimental effect next year from it?
Which is some of the issue in some of these cases. A lot of people, the Corps of Engineers came through and built a lot of dikes and levees, and most of those, or many of them, have been eroded down and haven't been fixed, haven't been repaired. If you've got a landlord and you're renting the place, well, who's you going to put thousands of dollars into doing that, or should the landlord do it? And then if they decide they can't do it, well, you can't afford to do it. It's disrepair.
Well, it's like, I didn't ever stand there with our youngest daughter, watching these waterfalls, and it sounds just like Multnomah Falls. I got audio of it, and it's just incredible to hear and it wasn't, I mean, it was just amazing. But I'm thinking, okay, worst case scenario, if we have a blowout. One, how are you going to fix it? It costs money to fix it. But two, if I don't fix it and say, you know what, I can get water in my place. I don't have the money to fix it, fine. But what's that do to everybody down from me?
If it floods somebody else, right?
It's going to flood somebody else because the water at some point is going to come up high enough that it's going to come out that hole. And all of a sudden I've just created a problem for, hundreds of other acres and at least 2 or 3 other people. So I don't know that you get sued for it, but I imagine you could. And it's just not neighborly anyway. So it's just one of those things, and that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Well, and Armin and I have been in that situation where there was an absentee landowner upriver that owned a significant amount of dike, and it wasn't being repaired. So whenever it flooded, we flooded.
Yeah.
And then the dike broke because we were in that position, and it came over onto their place. And you don't have, well, what we did in the end is we put our own in that circumvented that, protected him and us both. But if you don't do that, or if you can't afford to do that, or if somebody upstream is not, so then we see a bunch of levees that were on the channel that now have interim levees along them, to where each individual has tried protecting themselves.
I see that.
There was no plan to keep any of that up, and certainly no money to do that. So you have all these little interim dikes that each person puts up to protect themselves.
You still got to fix them then, though.
Yeah.
Because in the long run, it'll cost you more money.
Yeah, you've got to
You
keep
just
them
do it.
repaired.
You just, no matter what the cost is, I mean, you have to. What we were visiting about that day, Dad bought this place right across the river here from a fellow by the name of John Schroeder. Before that, there was a fellow by the name of Red Statler, lived here for quite a while. And he was the one that did a lot of levees. And they were just basically loose dirt levees. They never packed them, I don't think, or anything. So in 1957, Dad bought that and realized that they were going to have to rebuild all the dikes. He got a hold of the Corps of Army engineers, and they came out, they blueprinted the whole thing, and that's exactly how that levee there was built. It was built specs from the Army engineers. They cored that dike. They did a good job there on that one.
And your family has kept it up all those years. Very well.
But trying to keep the mice and the gophers out of it, and it's a constant battle.
But that's what you do. Your family the same way. That's why you didn't have it completely inundated.
And these dikes also at that time, they were supposed to have been kept clear. No brush, no trees, no nothing. Because when you hit that, that's when you start hitting the varmints. And we can see right upstream exactly, that hasn't been done. Well, even on my side right here, it hasn't been done.
But the government has also told you
That you have to have
do repair
vegetation.
on your levees. You do have to have brush, or you have to let that brush come back. And it closes and narrows the channel.
That's right. Well, you can see it right here,
Yes.
because all you gotta do is stop on the bridge and look that way, and I mean, you know, you can see it.
Yes, and it
And
wasn't.
one of these days, that's gonna be a bad deal. I mean, it's a big ice storm or something like that, you know, where we have a lot of ice in the river. And it's not clean like that, yeah. Yeah, that's bad, so. And I don't know whether they'll let you do anything about it now or not. I really don't. Well, there's a big bend right here, butts right up against Russell, now that the river's coming. Well, it used to, when it flowed this way, it used to be farther to the west. And now it's hugging the east, and there's a big island right there. And eventually, we're gonna have, you know, do something about that.
And the vegetation is holding it, so it's continued to grow.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
Oh, yeah.
choking the river,
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, there was some thorn brush down here, and I'm sure it was on my side of the river channel.
What happened to it?
Well, I invested in a still battery-operated chainsaw last week. And I went down there and I cut my thorn brush. Number one, I didn't like it because it got too high and I couldn't see what was going on
With
down
the
at
neighbors.
Arnaldo's farm.
There
So
you
I
go.
had to cut it,
There you
right?
go, right.
So it's down there piled up.
That's all right.
And you know, maybe that's the solution. Your immediate solution is just like this experience, is that you're gonna have to fix that dike, your levees, to protect yourself. You know, that might be ultimately all you can do. You can't afford it, you've gotta do it still.